Welcome back to the Changemaker podcast. I'm your host, Deke Copenhaver. Today, my guest is my good friend, Tom Fishman, who is the CEO of Builders, the artist formerly known as Starts With Us. Tom majored in physics and has a unique ability to break down enormous problems into simple units. I bear witness to that. He once worked at MTV. He is a Renaissance man. So we'll just get right into this. But Tom, CEO of Builders, welcome, brother. Glad to have you.
Welcome to the Changemaker podcast, hosted by Deke Copenhaver. Deke is the author of The Changemaker, a Forbes publishing book that has reached #1 on Amazon on multiple occasions and in multiple categories like management skills and total quality management. During this podcast, Deke interviews exceptional change-making leaders. Deke currently operates Copenhaver Consulting, where he helps local governments and other public organizations maximize their potential. He's also a sought-after public speaker. We hope that The Changemaker has an impact on you today and that you find takeaways that make you a better leader in your life. Now, here's Deke.
Deke, it's so good to be here and to be back here. I'm part of the Two-Timers Club here, which is a huge honor. It's always great to see you.
We've got Dov Barron as the next guest up. So who's another builder, and this will be his second time. Maybe I ought to do what they did on Saturday Night Live and start giving you guys, as you get multiple guest spots, give you a smoking jacket or something like that.
If it looks anything like that jacket, I'll take two. You look, as I was telling you off camera, you look phenomenal. I feel underdressed. You look great.
No, not at all. Well, so Tom, for our listeners and viewers that, I talk a lot about the building and bridging movement. We have lots of folks from the organization that have been on, but talk as if somebody does not know what you do and what the building and bridging movement is, just enlighten them a bit.
Yeah, will do. Well, let's start with the name, which you referenced, the artist formerly known as. So people may have heard of us as the movement, and the organization Starts With Us. We have since rebranded as the Builders Movement, or Builders for short, and we are a part of the bridging, depolarization, pluralism field. It goes by many names, full of a bunch of really great organizations trying to empower people at all levels of society to connect across lines of difference and more effectively solve problems together. And that is indeed our mission. We're trying to equip people with the right, with the right mindsets, the habits, the tools, and the networks to more effectively and cooperatively solve problems in a world where it seems like every incentive, from our media to our politics and everything in between, is trying to tear us apart and pit us against each other. So we're trying to replace that us versus them mindset with a problem-solving mindset.
Well, there are, I believe there are over 500 organizations that are part of this movement. And it's interesting to me because you guys, I represented Starts With Us, now Builders in New Hampshire a little over a year ago at an event that the National Governors Association was putting on. Spencer Cox, they had their Disagree Better program. So there's like 500 and something people in that room from all walks of life, all political persuasions. And I'm like going, this is what everybody, all the data and all the studies that we've done, it's what people want to see, but there was like basically no mainstream media coverage of it. And I do think, and part of what I'm doing with this podcast, and I know a lot of other people are, is sort of counter-programming to the media narrative that our nation and our world are so broken that there's no chance of healing. There's no chance of bringing people together, because that's not what I see. And I know that's not what you see.
That's right. I mean, so you and me both, brother, like we are, we sort of make products and programs in a few different sectors, media, education, civic activation. I can talk more about those, but it does the beating heart and the earliest sort of programming that we started to build up. And sort of where I come from. You mentioned MTV and some of the other places that I've worked in the sort of pop culture, media, digital marketing sort of worlds. We're bringing that to bear and using those tools, which are often left unchecked. The pathways by which polarization happens is through social media and these other things. So counter programming is a big part of is a big part of what we do. The trick is we need to tell the stories, which there are many of the people who want to connect across lines of difference, or the people who are more complex than the left, blue, left, right, red, blue sort of boxes that we tend to put each other into. We need to tell those stories in a way that harnesses the animal spirits of the algorithm to our advantage. So that's a big part of the builder's secret sauce, is figuring how to make these concepts interesting, mainstream, entertaining, viral, share-worthy, these concepts that come up in more traditional media. And the reason we're excited about the prospects of success is exactly what you said, Deke. There are many more of us in what we call the 87% than the people who seek to divide for power and profit. The 87% comes from some research that we did that shows that 87% of Americans across the political aisle are sick of the divisive politics and want to figure out a way to seek solutions, even on the things we disagree on.
Well, it's interesting. So we, several months ago, took a direct hit from Hurricane Helene. Yeah. So which, most people, Western North Carolina got more of the national media, and I understand. I mean, it was horrific here, but it was more horrific there. But one of the things that I've seen in that situation is it's pulled back the veil, right? And gotten people out of their comfort zones to where people are like, I didn't know people in Augusta were living in those conditions. So we have had a 20% poverty rate for decades. I just have come to find out that people in our region, 51% live below the threshold of the ALICE line. So ALICE is an acronym, asset limited, income constrained, but employed. So they're the working poor. And so when I start talking to people about that, I'm like, I'm not trying to blame anybody, but I'm like, we're not sequencing things together across all lines of difference if we're not moving the needle on poverty. We've got tremendous wealth, a strong economy, just all sorts of stuff going for us. But it takes getting outside our comfort zone. But that is what I've seen here. I think we're going to come out of this stronger than ever. But it's been so interesting that, and we'll talk a little bit about LA too, but you've got all these people that have been out of their comfort zones, but they're actually meeting people that might live around the corner from them that they had never met. And so I've got a friend that's a youth director at a local church, 26-year-old, great young man. But he said, we had a huge amount of teenage boys from our church. They were out of school for 2 weeks. These guys went and volunteered in the community, and they've said it's changed their life, to be able to help people that they may never have met. So I think people look at that 20% poverty rate or look at toxic polarization. Oh, it's just, there's nothing we can do about this. I'm like, BS. We can win this one.
100%. 100%. Firstly, I just have to say, just bless you for the work you did during hurricane relief efforts and continue to do. I know that, your heart is with Georgians wherever they are in the political spectrum, and that really showed. And what was amazing to see. The question, Deke, is like, we know it's BS. What, does it take a disaster to prove it? I mean, it's the human condition, for better or worse, is that we're going to find those silver linings. And when a disaster like Hurricane Helene hits, or now these wildfires, unbelievable in LA, doing incredible damage, indiscriminate of political leanings, doing damage, right, to everybody, that it's only then that these conditions are spotlighted. It's only then that we see there are some things that are more important than the kind of flimsy culture wars that, keep us scrolling and addicted to our phones every day. Because when stuff gets real, avoid the bad language here. When stuff gets real, that's when, you see Governor Newsom and Governor Greg Abbott of Texas, exchanging sort of civil dialogue on social media. It's when you see Governor DeSantis and President Biden working together for the good of Floridians in the wake, of these challenges. So the question is, do we have to wait for these disasters, or can we continue to show that it's historically been not only possible, but frequent that our leaders can work together across lines of difference when it really matters, and remind ourselves that that's not only possible, but at one time it was much more normal and regular, that our electeds weren't punished for working across lines of difference. They were actually lauded for it. And that's what we have to really think about, is how to change those incentives, because it shouldn't take that level of human, sort of humanitarian disaster and toll for us to be reminded of what's possible and act on it.
Absolutely. Well, it's funny. I was having lunch with a friend of mine that works at the Augusta National, and he said during tournament week, we really want to tell the story of what happened in Augusta. And I said, literally, people from all over the United States have come in to help us, to give us aid. To a person, they all say, we have never seen a community come together like this. And these are people that do disaster for a living. And I was like, man, that's your story. And, that's a story that's not really making it out there. So we started a prayer breakfast my first day in office 19 years ago, 19th anniversary last month. But our local governing body has some political infighting and such and all. But so at that prayer breakfast, it ended up two commissioners that might not be on, Gian Hall well with our mayor, who I'm very close to, were there.
Right.
And so I've got a coin that I give everybody, a healing coin that I'm going to send you and the entire Starts With Us team, Builders team. But I was like, I'm so glad that you guys were here today. And I gave them both a coin. It's got, whatever the saint is, the patron saint of healing on it. But Saint Raphael. But one of the points that I got to make in that meeting, in the prayer meeting, was we've got 14 churches that joined together to work together across all lines of difference in the faith-based community before the storm hit. We've been meeting every week since then. So I have a guy that's a friend of mine, a business owner. He came to one of the meetings. He didn't know the churches were meeting, but he told us he sent out a text to 20 business owners after the storm saying, hey, what can we do to work together to help with the relief efforts? 26 people showed up the first day. Wow. They are still working, however many months in. They want to remain anonymous. And he got to a point where he's like, well, now we can maybe start applying for funds to be reimbursed from FEMA or our local community foundation. They don't want any reimbursement. And he said, these are guys that are competitors in business that would slit each other's throat over a business deal. And so I'm like, so our elected officials that were at the prayer breakfast, I was like, so if these guys who would slit each other's throats in business want to remain anonymous, they don't want any compensation. If they can set aside their egos to serve the greater good of the community, we all can do that.
Yeah. And these are the stories that we need to see, but we won't, right? Like if we can't see it, we can't be it, but it's much more click worthy and addicting to see, the most extreme funhouse mirror version of, various political parties or social movements and hold them up and say, oh my God. And, have to, as opposed to what you're talking about. So a story like that, Deke, is not only beautiful, it needs production and distribution power. So these are the things that we love working with our movement partners like you to actually source these stories and actually tell them to the world. We've been fortunate over now the last at Builders, 3+ years of operating to build up a really sizable digital following that, nearly 3.5 million people online, hundreds of thousands of people getting a newsletter. So it's small but mighty, a drop in the bucket compared to where we want to go. But the kind of story that you're telling, that is like a seed for us to start to plant it and then for people to spread. And people ask us, well, great. Okay. There's 87% of us and, we're in alignment. We want to see solutions, but what do we do next? And it's spreading those kinds of stories. I hate to be Builders is one source of them, but you can find them if you're looking. Find those stories and tell them when people are, give your attention. I say this frequently. We're not voting, Deke, only once every 4 years or even every 2 years in the midterms anymore. We vote every second of every day with our attention and our clicks and our shares. So give some of that. It doesn't have to be all of it. Give some of that to the stories that are demonstrating what's possible when people collaborate across lines of difference to solve problems, because it's incredible. And if you're looking for a source for those stories, shameless plug, you may find them on Builders, but there's lots of places you can find them.
Well, and, people want to hear these stories and I want to get your take on this. I feel like the mainstream media is losing market share. I mean, it has been that way for a while, but we talked about podcasts really had an impact on this last election.
Yep.
So there is, you just don't have to accept, well, all I've got to watch is my 120 channels. It's like people can search out those podcasts and everything where people, not just me, are telling these stories. But I'll tell you two more that were just really interesting to me. So my businessman friend, they went and chainsawed out a neighborhood. He said, we got to a gentleman, an older gentleman, he had a hole the size of a Volkswagen Bug in his roof. He was on oxygen. And they said, what can we do to help you? He said, don't help me. I don't need help. Help my neighbors. They need it worse than I do. And so another great story is there was a lady whose house got demolished. She was living in a hotel with all these FEMA workers. So she rented a house, but before she even moved in, she invited 40 FEMA workers to her house for Thanksgiving dinner. And I'm like, that's the human spirit. And that's it. But if people will go to an alternative if they're provided with it. But I just think in general, the mainstream media is like, but we've always done it this way. But we've always done it this way. And it's, print media, digital's just a fad. Well, where is print media now?
Yeah. I mean, the ascendance of podcasts, in particular in this election and sort of preceding that, doesn't it speak to just people's desire for authenticity, for give me some truth, somebody once said.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that, this is just a changing landscape that we're in. By the way, there's pros and cons to that because the legacy media had things like, fact checking. And when it felt like we had a shared, sort of narrative, whether or not we agreed with it, it made communication easier. So there's some things we obviously have to get used to. But I think that this is, in a way that's both really exciting and in a way that maybe is a little bit scary. Is like it's a new frontier, which means people need to step up and shape it and tell the stories that need to be told and give them their due. And I think beyond the storytelling, you mentioned a few things there, and stories of that you told about Augusta and some of the things on the ground is like what comes after the storytelling. What are the actions we can take in our communities to bridge divides and solve problems? And you touched on a number of them. One of them is people convening, just gathering, you know what I mean, once a week around shared set of values. We, on our website, we have a little blurb on how to start up a local builders group. If you want to convene weekly or monthly with people who are sick of the same old BS and want to find ways in your communities to actually affect change and to prioritize problem solving. There's some tools to do that. We have educational tools to do that. But, you sort of summed it up in saying you kind of got to go outside at some point. You know what I mean? Like you got to get out of the world of the ones and zeros and go look people in the eye who you live near, because those are the people, whoever you voted for, you're hitting the same potholes on Main Street and you got to fill them together. That's sort of, the reality of what's so great about community. Brings you together around shared values, shared concerns, shared interests. So that's really important.
Well, it's funny. I had somebody tell me that AI is going to take over the world. Well, I know that's, a debate and everything. I said, no, it's not. He said, well, why is that? I said, because you can't program a soul. We as human beings need each other. I mean, it's so good to be in person or face to face. I quit looking at media and social media. So I figured this year I'm going to empty myself out, but I'm going to fill myself back up with knowledge and with just all sorts of other stuff. I don't miss it. It's rather than putting garbage in, I'm like, well, that. But one guy I was listening to, Andy Crouch, was talking about building trust. And so he's a Christian intellectual, used to be at Harvard and all. But he said, really, in building trust, you start with 3 people. Because 3 people, you can have implicit trust. And he's like, then start with small groups and then maybe go up to 12. He said, and then, max out at 120. But I'm like, if, as you say, if you start a builders movement in your own backyard, that is little by little and at the grassroots. But I said, I'm just trying to connect the tribes and to shine a light on people that are doing that in other places, because it does. So I ran my first political campaign that you're aware of back during the spring, and to get our mayor a full-time vote. It was uplifting. It was inclusive. It was totally grassroots. I mean, we engaged at the grassroots level, also focused on earned media, which our local media were partners. Everybody beats up the media, but it passed with 72% of the vote. And I'm like, man, if you give people an alternative, they will go to it. And it was young, old, black, white, different areas of the city, but it was fun too. And I'm like, look, you can't change Washington right off the bat, but all you need to do is vote. That's all you need to do in this, and stand in solidarity. And now people have taken ownership of it, and they're engaged and informed, which is a great thing to have with an electorate.
Yeah, one of the things in terms of people just getting more civically active, in terms of thinking about what inputs are they considering when it comes to making voting decisions. There's, of course, the policy considerations that really matters. You're going to vote for people whose policies and values, you're aligned with. But we've lost a little bit of the how. That's the what, right? What you believe. But the how you go about problem solving. So, we, towards the end of last year, when we launched the Builders Power Rankings, the idea behind that was to give let's give a numerical score to everybody in the U.S. Congress. We did this for 4 weeks, like a football power rankings, basically. That was the point. We ranked the top 5 builders from the 2 major parties, and the bottom 5 dividers of the week for each week. By the way, the dividers of last week can become builders, in the following week. So the point isn't to judge somebody. The point is people can grow. We all have our weeks, But we wanted to try to help people think about like the incentives, because Deke, there's plenty of people in Congress who I may, be aligned with their policy beliefs on any particular issue, but the way they conduct themselves is such that there's virtually no chance of them effectively building a coalition or doing the hard work of democracy to negotiate and get a bill introduced and get a bill passed. So what good is the fact that, I'm aligned with them on a policy, that they're going to, say something wild in a hearing or in a floor speech and then get social media clout for it, but it has no chance of getting passed. So the Builders Power Rank is meant to give this score. So when I go to the polls, I can say not only whose policies am I aligned with, but who's got a real shot to like actually get something done and be a role model on the path to doing it.
Well, it's funny. So people have said I'm politically agnostic, probably. And it's funny to be involved in government or politics in some way for 2 decades and to never be affiliated with a party or anything, to be able to be Switzerland. That's a blessing in and of itself. Yeah. But so I've got friends on both sides of the aisle. The governor is a dear friend of mine, and throughout COVID and everything, I text him regularly, and he texts me right back. Just words of encouragement. So I like to, when I see elected officials doing really good things, being a statesman, which he has done a great job with that, I like to encourage and just reward good behavior. But same thing, Senator John Ossoff from Georgia was at the top of the builders list on several weeks straight. But I love texting him and going, John, I am so excited to see you at the top of that list. And to be able to create something which Builders has done to where you're able to reward good behavior. And a lot of people think that there's nobody working in bipartisan fashion in Congress. There are a lot of moderates getting out of there, but there are still people fighting the good fight.
There's so much good work getting done. I mean, you sort of hear this, I guess, if you're maybe in this world that we're in. I wonder, your listeners may know this, or may not be surprised to hear it. But you frequently hear that some of the most kind of publicly divisive people behind closed doors are totally reasonable, easy to talk to, but they feel like they're putting on this show. So it gets clipped and it goes viral on TikTok, or you get 1 million likes on X and you can fundraise off that. You put it in the newsletter, and it's like, what are the incentives, guys? Like, we got to figure out, like, what are we rewarding here with that attention that we're giving people and ultimately with our votes? And to your point, Deke, about your successful positive campaign, this sort of multi-partisan positive campaign you guys ran around that ballot initiative last year. You mentioned before Disagree Better, right? For your listeners, if you don't know, Disagree Better was the signature campaign of Governor Spencer Cox of Utah for the last 2 years when he was the chairman of the National Governors Association. And this campaign basically would bring people together, typically governors or elected officials, a Democrat and a Republican, to sit with each other, to joke around, to actually be in community with each other, people who disagree on the most fundamental of gut-wrenching personal issues, on gun rights and safety, on abortion access, on immigration, deep disagreements on the way to solve our toughest problems, but demonstrating that they can sit together, they can be civil to each other, that we're all trying to get to the same place, which is a better place for America and Americans. And it turned out that Professor Rob Willer over at Stanford, who's really active in this bridge building space, ran some studies and found, I'm sorry, Rob, if I get this wrong, so everybody go look at it. So I'm not doing but I'm going to get the headlines right, which are that across partisan groups, which means, kind of far left, centrist, center right, far right, people who watched these videos felt better and more positively towards both elected officials who were in it.
Yep.
Right. And go find that study, dear listener, and go deeper, because it was even more poignant than what I'm saying. But the point being, the takeaway is that the positivity paid. The positivity paid off. People liked seeing it. It might not swing a vote, but the affinity over time, it's like if we can win votes off being civil and respectful while maintaining our strongest convictions, what's more American than that?
No, I totally agree. And I'm like, I was saying at a meeting of some of the groups working for the recovery here, I said, you know what? We don't need to just get like-minded people doing this. The people that we don't think, or the organizations that we don't think, we don't want to work with them. I'm like, we have got to invite everybody to be a part of the recovery. And it can't just be the people we like, or this is my tribe, because this thing is so major. It's going to take all of us joining together. But I've always said that we're not joined by our strengths. We're joined by our vulnerabilities and our weaknesses. And I think the hurricane, the fires, that showed that. But I want to get back to something you just said. So we talked before coming on air about, I do not know the context because I'm not really I'm not doing media. I'm taking a break. It might be a permanent break. But I did see, so Jimmy Carter being from Georgia, and I was talking with I get monthly immunotherapy precautionary treatments. And I was talking to a black minister friend of mine that was saying, his legacy, I'm like, his legacy, he has a legacy as a president, but his legacy of humanitarian issues is, that guy was amazing. But at his funeral, to see President Obama and President Trump sharing a laugh, and I'm like, okay, I don't even need to know the context. Viscerally, that just made me feel better about America just seeing that.
I know. Me too. It's relieving in a way to see them. And listen, whatever you feel about both, and people feel very strongly about both.
Oh, yeah.
We don't get to choose our perfect moments of reconciliation. We don't get to choose our perfect moments of civility. You can decide who you want to, forgive and for what. But seeing these two statesmen who have been pit against each other, who have often been at each other's throats in various ways, share a laugh is a kind of salve, I think, for this zero-sum game, absolutist, binary, us versus them, like the mindset. When we say toxic polarization is what we're up against.
Yeah. Some
polarization is normal, right? Like some issues are really difficult and they can be polarizing, and we can have a really strong opinions, across a table, like in an argument. Toxic is when we're enemies, when your harm is something that I'm cheering on, or when your misfortune is something that I'm cheering on. Then you've gone so far into this toxic sort of mania that problem solving becomes all but impossible. When to collaborate with somebody you disagree with becomes a betrayal. Democracy is impossible to play out in the way that it has, for centuries. So to see that Does it mean everybody who's skeptical of Obama or highly critical of Trump or any of these things, does that go away? No, but they are people. They can sit next to each other, and it's not immediate, a duel. You know what I mean? Like these are people, and it felt good to see it.
Well, in that regard, I'm making a conscious, intentional effort to try to find the good in everybody I meet, no matter how unlikable I may think they are. But it kind of goes back to when former president, soon to be new president Trump, was the assassination attempt. And I saw Lindsey Graham, and I know Lindsey Graham, he's from South Carolina, but on one of the Sunday news programs, and he was emotional. And he said, this guy, he's a person. He's a father. He's a grandfather. And I thought, that's Lindsey Graham, whatever I think about Lindsey Graham, that's heartfelt. And that really put it in context to me. I'm like, the media makes caricatures of our political figures, of entertainment figures, but they, as you say, they are people. Yeah. So I'm trying to see the humanity, and I'm like, if I'm just going to condemn somebody and say they're irredeemable, everybody is redeemable, but we need to give each other a chance and to get together and talk and share, not just, our differences or whatever, our likes and dislikes, but why do we think and feel that way? I mean, if we can get to the bottom of it, I'm like, look, I was socialized in a different way than a lot of other people were. My worldview is biased by the way I was socialized, but that doesn't make me bad or wrong, and it doesn't make anybody else bad or wrong. It's just different.
Yeah, I think that's frankly one of the most humbling things that any of us can realize, is that if we had grown up 100 miles in any cardinal direction from where we did grow up, we might have a totally different set of beliefs and worldview. That a lot of this stuff, can be, I don't want to say accidental, because we all get to choose it. We grow up and we choose our own beliefs, but the way in which we're nurtured, especially from when we're young, has a lot to do with who we are. You mentioned before, Deke, that our vulnerabilities bind us together. And you also mentioned that, it's about getting out of our comfort zones. And it's important to mention, too, that as we look at that, Obama and Trump moment, different people may feel different levels of threat by something like that based on who they are, what their identities are. People who feel, in particular, like, communities who feel, have been marginalized in this country historically and things like that, right, are going to feel, potentially like, hey, I have a different perspective on this than you and I might. We are, we're white, we're men in America. That gives us a particular kind of worldview. It doesn't disqualify it, but it is particular. But it's interesting because even as I think about, okay, well, different populations and communities may feel differently about when they may have a different shape and sized comfort zone. They may feel comfortable pushing it at certain times, that I'm not, and vice versa. All of that is very normal and very human, but it's also not easy to put people in a box when we look at, for example, right, Trump gaining so much in the black vote, in the sort of Hispanic vote, like throughout the country, in the working class, places that have been traditionally, Democratic. So none of it fits easily into a box, no matter what community you're in. You know what I mean?
No.
You're not defined in particular by your ethnic identity or your racial identity. And I think we saw a lot of that play out in this election, but we are all unique, and how we interpret the Trump-Obama moment will be different for everybody. But I hope seeing that laugh is at least a sense that, oh, wait a minute, despite a lot of these guys actually don't want to kill each other, so maybe I should rethink how much, the fervor I have about my own beliefs.
No, it was almost like an AI video, but I'll tell you, and I think too, as I say, I've sort of gone on a media diet, but there's so many things that we just can't do anything about. But I was asked to do election recap at my local exchange club, and so everybody thought when they were bringing me in that it was we're going to be in court, all this stuff, and I'm like, I got up and I said, well, I could just say Trump won big and drop the mic, but I said no. But I will say that is how democracy is supposed to work, and whether you voted for him or not, he is our president. He won the majority of the votes. The majority of Americans want to see him back there. Now, people can have that's just the way the democracy works. And your guy or gal is not always going to win. But I also made the point, the 24-hour news cycle does us no favors. But I said 1968. So Bobby Kennedy's assassinated, Martin Luther King's assassinated. There are literally riots all over the United States. Lyndon Johnson announced that he was not going to run for president without telling anybody. The death toll in Vietnam was the worst that year out of the whole war.
Yeah.
And Nixon got elected. But I'm like, can you imagine if we had the 24-hour news cycle in 1968?
Well, Deke, this is like, I heard Karl Rove, who's a movement partner of ours, and is just an incredibly circumspect and historically, so steeped in the nation's history. I heard him talk at the Texas Tribune Festival about how hilarious he found it that people think this is the most divided that we've ever been when you look historically. But you can understand why people think that, right? Because it's just in your face all the time. It's in your feeds all the time. It's in your news networks. It's just, there's money in that story. There's power in maintaining that story. But we, the 87%, continue to call bullshit on it. You can bleep that.
You're welcome to cause.
Yeah, but the point is, we can't just call BS on it from our couches. We got to get up. We got to go outside. We got to convene. We got to take civic activation. We got to push for civic muscles to get strengthened in our schools and in our churches and in our other, houses of worship. And ultimately, we got to, be an active part of the next chapter of the American story, or else it's going to get written by the algorithms. And, then you'll get what we've got.
No, and that's to me is that I'm like, okay, I honestly believe that the majority, the 87% of our country, wants to come together on common ground. We don't want to hate our neighbor. We don't want to hate anybody. We don't want to, but really, when you think about it, I am not naive enough not to know that people gain significant money and significant power by keeping us divided. I mean, that's just the reality of the situation. And we talk about, the marketplace. One of the podcasts I was listening to said, it's really, he said, you ought to stay as far away from the algorithms as you can. I mean, honestly, he said, but that's the best thing. Okay, if 87% would get off of social media and basically say, okay, we're just 87% of us, we're just going to log off and we're going to impact you in the pocketbook. Because I'm like, that's almost what it's going to take. That it's just, they're making money doing it the way they're doing it, but they're not, I don't think anybody in this is evil, but they're not really thinking of what the toll on society is from all this.
Well, they're for-profit companies in a capitalist. That's not their job. What their job is to do the very best thing for shareholders at all times. That's what they're going to be really good at. And waiting for enormous for-profit companies and to find their better angels. This is a rant, by the way, that I'm paraphrasing from the great Scott Galloway, who has really, I think is really, really, really sharp on this stuff. Waiting for them to come around. Maybe it'll happen once in a while. You have a really scrupulous entrepreneur like, Daniel Lubetsky or somebody like that, who's going to, weave in a social mission to an enormously profitable business. But in general, it's not going to happen, which means we're reliant on smart regulation from the good people in the United States government to figure out how to do that. And these spaces have been just completely unregulated. So we're quickly getting, I'm not an expert on the regulatory frameworks and Section 230, that media companies, are getting this that social media companies are getting this carve out to not, have to face restrictions that typical media publishers face. But when you have an algorithm that's putting a thumb on the scale of some media and not others, that's an editor by any other name. And that means, So, but again, all of this stuff is just us flapping our gums unless you start picking up the phone, calling your representatives, incentivizing them to solve problems, solve the underlying problems. And these are, not the problems that I think most Americans are concerned about, right? The great majority of Americans are concerned with kitchen table issues and solving problems that are economic, that are educational, that are health related, right? These things that are fundamental. It's another reason why constantly crying foul about democracy, whether you're on the left or the right, is not really an appealing message. It's people are concerned about roads and bridges for the most part. And then it's kind of a luxury belief to be thinking about, even though it's so, so important. So we got to try to find that balance. But yeah.
Well, and to me, it's, as I said, I started off my speech saying, to all the people that are losing their minds over this election, I'm like, just chill out. But I almost feel like it's like Y2K. It's like, oh gosh, if this election's going to go crazy and sideways, and wait a minute, we're still here. That didn't happen. So what do we do now?
Exactly.
And I'm more hopeful than I've ever been, because I know that builders are doing what we're doing, these other organizations. And so if you're out at the grassroots level, but I do think some of these, tech people, they're in a bubble. And so I'm like, they don't understand, the results of this stuff. Maybe they want to look away. But after Hurricane Helene hit, I had a lady that I used to help take care of some. She just lived by herself. She had cancer. She went into to hospice the week of the storm. Yeah. So she was in the hospital. The storm hit. She couldn't get back into her house. And so she called me and she said, I really need your help. And I said, where are you? She was in a hotel room in the not nicest section of town. She was there with her son, her son's girlfriend, and their 2 toddler daughters, one bed and one cot. And so during my remarks for the Exchange Club, I said, look, I'm not saying this to guilt anybody, but, we should have compassion, and just knowing that people, and it's, people get in their little cycle, and, you get the kids to school and everything. So I'm like, I'm not blaming anybody for not wanting to help people that are poor. I think the majority of our citizens in our nation are probably pretty good people that want to do the right thing. So that's what I'm hoping we're going to tap into more and more, that people will join the movement and realize that you can make a difference. And, it's basically the world starts outside your front door. And if you want to improve the world, start with what's outside your own front door.
Well said. Well said. If you don't mind, Deke, I feel like if people are interested in joining the movement, come find Builders. We're on all your favorite social platforms. You go to buildersmovement.org. You can sign up, join the movement there, sign up for a newsletter, and we will do our level best to elevate. We can't get to all 500, but we are frequently in partnership with so many of the other good organizations in the space. We try to elevate and platform them as many, as much as we can to do our part, having invested in growing an audience as much as we have. But yeah, I agree with you 100%. We can put the tools in your hands, but ultimately it's up to you to go outside. You know what I mean? It's up to you to take action.
Well, and I'm a punk rock fan, as are you. And I'm like, okay, I like to rebel against authority or the man. Toxic polarization is the man. Divisiveness is the man.
Totally.
So I will rebel against that all day long and enjoy doing it.
Toxic polarization is manipulating people.
Yeah.
It manipulates people into giving their time and their talent and their treasure to hyper-partisan things that are not focused on solving the underlying problems. It's a form of power. And I think that we just have to, and it's a form of profit driving.
Yeah.
Speaking of punk rock, favorite album of the last year, go. What's your favorite 2024?
I like Fontaine's DC. I sent you that, didn't I?
You did. Yeah.
Out of Ireland.
Yeah.
Very
cool.
They're so good. That's like classic college, alternative rock. How about you?
I got really into the new Jack White album, the No Name album, which felt like what a throwback to like kind of
man, that is so
Piss and
good
Vinegar,
too.
White Stripes era of Jack White. I'm going to see him at the Masonic Temple here in Detroit soon. So that's,
I'm so upset though, because love Jane's Addiction, but Perry Farrell's got to punch Dave Navarro in the face and they break up.
I know. That's just Perry,
Yeah. Well, let's you and I and all our merry band of builders just join together and not get across the line. I mean, not get Perry Farrell and Dave Navarro, but go all Sex Pistols on toxic polarization. How about that?
I like it. Now, if we're going to start brainstorming, then your audience better buckle up because we're going to go down some rabbit holes.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, well, I'll tell you, we're probably getting close to being out of time. We could talk all day, and usually we do. But I always ask the question, and once again, I'm more hopeful than I ever have been. What puts a smile on your face and brings joy to your heart on a daily basis? And I love those big amps behind you, man.
I mean, those are some of the things that put the smile on my face, to tell you the truth. That is one thing, is, music is both just being creative and being expressive and doing that with, sort of with other people. I just find music, both as an audience member and as a player and playing in bands with people, like all this other stuff kind of falls away. I don't really know what anybody believes or where their votes were or anything. It's just sort of taking part in this really visceral human experience with music. So that pretty much always gets there. I got 3 kids who are, 9, 7, and 3 now, and, driving me nuts, but I'm smiling all the while too. I love, my family and seeing them thrive and grow. And right. Isn't that what sort of we're all looking for, right? To some degree, is like that next generation. I want them to do a little better than we did, and want everyone to be able to get an education and go to the doctor when they're sick and have opportunities. And at the end of the day, whatever neighborhood you're in, whoever you're casting a ballot for, I think we all kind of want to align around those same values, which America has been so good at delivering for so many people for so long. So let's keep it going, guys. Let's keep solving problems together. Let's hold our politicians accountable to solving problems, not just, saying the right stuff, but doing the right stuff and doing it the right way. And that's the stuff that's making me smile these days.
Well, man, I love to collaborate, and I think this is a collab. And fortunately, Misty from Builders reached out to me today. So I've gone off social media, but I was like, man, I want to speak into the situation in LA. So she connected me, and Tori, who is listening to us, will be on this collab too, but with a young lady, Melinda Hale, out of LA, that sort of sees things the way on the ground, on the street, the way I saw them here in Augusta, that there's tragedy, but so much good. And so we get to join voices on a collaboration from coast to coast. So I just want to say to Builders, thank you for that opportunity, for that collab, and be on the lookout for it to our viewers and listeners.
It's partners like you, that help us get the word out, use your platform like this, and the many years of experience you have, the credibility you have in Augusta and in Georgia and beyond, Deke. We're so grateful to have you as a partner. And I hope your listeners will check out what we're up to. You can, like I said, you find us on social and on the web, and we'll take it from there and connect you with other people in the 87% who are looking to overcome this us versus them stuff and move on to a much more problem solving oriented mindset for the future of this country.
I guarantee you, man, we're going to keep on rocking in the free world.
Hear, hear.
That's about all the time we got. Dropping the mic, and we are out. Hey, guys, thanks for listening to or watching the Changemaker podcast today. Greatly appreciate it. If you're listening and you want to see the video, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel at Deke Copenhaver. That's pretty easy to remember, I would think. But really, we also want to remind you to like, subscribe, rate across all platforms, download. And if you're looking for a coach, a speaker, or anything, you know where to find me. Just email me at dekecopenhaver.com. And thanks so much for listening.